like Wade said, we're going to do this a little bit differently. I am so tired of Zoom. I don't know how you all feel about that, but all my classes it's Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. There's no interaction, so I'm going to pose some questions to everyone. And I just want to make sure you have a good seat because this is going to be very visual in this presentation. Okay, as we move forward. I don't know how you guys are feeling, but because of the pandemic, I was at a library for the first time in a long time. Like, oh, this is what a library feels like. In a group fitness class, and I hadn't done med ball slams in about a year and a half. Put a suit on finally. I forgot how to tie my tie. I learned how to retie my tie. So today we're going to discuss dark tourism. We're going to basically look at where did these events, these viewing episodes occur. What were the mediums, the platforms for these viewing episodes for dark tourism? And was it legal under military law? So as we get started, I guess we should really mention this. There are more than 150 Civil War prisons that were established during the American Civil War. By the way, how's my voice protection? Everybody even the way back? Good? Coaching helps. Teaching high school and coaching definitely helps. So more than 150 Civil War prisons that were established during the American Civil War. And I tell my students, each have their very unique background. It's hard to write a macro monograph or a full-length treatment on prisons in general because they are so different. Today we're going to be focusing on number 11 in Ohio, number 4 in Illinois, and number 10 in New York State. The historical writing, the historiography of not only Civil War captivity, but captivity in general has really made some significant strides. And we're lucky today, among our audience is Daniel Krebs back there, and Daniel and Maureen Foote. Maureen spoke here, I think, Wayne, when was Maureen here? 2 years ago?
2 years, 3 years.
For her Yankee playbook?
Yeah.
So Maureen and Daniel, they edited a collection, Useful Captives, and they looked at the cultural impact, religion, policy, environment, all these factors that deal with captivity in American military conflict. So we're really making great strides in looking at incarceration, not only for the Civil War, but in wars in general. So let's get it started. Dark touring through time. What is dark tourism? What is dark tourism? I'd like to see some hands up. Anybody want to take a step? What do we got? Yes?
It's like going on the Jack the Ripper tour.
Jack the Ripper tour. Maybe, should I even say it? Ghost tours at Gettysburg? Just in case. We have a long history now. The term is relatively new for dark tourism. It was established in 1996 by professors at Caledonia University. And John Lennon and Malcolm Foley were the ones who first termed it in 1996. They looked at the Roman gladiator games. Okay? They also looked at executions during medieval times. They thought of that. They also looked into 17th century Europe, specifically the Bedlam Asylum, if you're familiar with that, where there was actually pay to view. So you would hand over money and you would look at the different patients in the asylum. And as we look at dark tourism more and more, a part of the tour at Bedlam was they provided sticks, and as you're walking through the bewildering halls of Bedlam, they would hit patients with their sticks as they were going through the tour that they're paying for. So there's this dark side, obviously, to this type of viewing episodes. This guy right here, P.T. Barnum. I think we've heard of him to a degree. Are you familiar with this American Museum, this National American Museum in New York? He would charge 25 cents a head, and with it, people could enter his museums, but he really took advantage, and I actually have it here, I'm going to read from the primary sources a little bit, but he would take advantage of individuals with deformities, inconsistencies, or other physical anomalies by charging 25 cents a person under the guise of giving an educational tour. So he becomes the quote-unquote great grandstander and one of the people, the fathers of the proverbial freak show, so to speak. And in antebellum America, we kind of have these antecedents with the Roman gladiator games, with tours at Bedlam, and traveling circuses, menageries, and there's our PT one of those. So here we have, up here, gladiator games, Bedlam, and then PT Barnum. And actually some of the POWs during the Civil War refer. Whoever's getting the mind of the sun is good. Perfect. So the gentry of Johnson's Island. At first, when the Civil War broke out, Union officials thought that there would be only one prison camp required. Just one. So the Commissary General, William Hoffman, he sought out a place to house captured Confederates. And he looked to Sandusky Bay. Okay. And in so doing, I'm going to show you a picture of Johnson's Island right here. Has anybody ever been to the Put-in-Bay Islands? Cedar Point? The wooden roller coasters? Good, so you have an idea of where we're going. So we kind of have a tour culture to begin with, so to speak, in this area. But for various reasons, Johnson's Island really appealed to William Hoffman. Why do you think? Why do you think? Get some takers on that.
Difficult to escape, right?
So you're an island to deter escapes. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Why else?
Cost.
Hoffman, good Terry. With Hoffman, it's always cost. And you're close to Sandusky, which can furnish supplies to that prison camp, right? So in the first book on Elmira, I look into the contracts. Okay, so you're close to a large city or a decent city where it can furnish supplies to provide that prison camp. Yes.
Far away from the Confederacy.
You're far away from absolutely. You're far away from the Confederacy. Again, to deter escapes. There's another piece to this. Another piece to this. If you've been to the Put-in-Bay Islands, you know this especially. Some of you have maybe done this on your golf carts.
Very good water supply.
You do have water, yes. Yep, you do have good water supply. The Put-in-Bay Islands are known for their vineyards. Johnson's Island did not have any vineyards. South Bass Island did, Middle Bass Island did, Kelly's Island did. And Hoffman was worried that his guards would be half drunk while doing service there. So he said, we're not going to do that, we're going to have it on Johnson's Island. So that was one of the main reasons why William Hoffman decided to go with Sandusky Bay. The selection site's 40 acres. We were talking about the story at lunch, a very unique prison camp. Dave Bush is actually doing an archaeological dig out there still with his students, but that is the prison. It had a long existence, 1862 to 1865. Now it evolved and transformed from a prison to house all POWs in the Civil War to just officers only. So this was an elite prison camp, very elite. Here you have a section back here. So I do want to ask a question. What do you think the officer policies would be for captains here at Johnson's Island? What do you think?
Same way we wanted our officers treated.
Nice, right? Yes, yes. So an example of this, and we see this, you see a differentiation between prisons during the Civil War, between the enlisted men's prison camps. We're going to talk about Camp Douglas, we're going to talk about Elmira soon. But at Johnson's Island, officer only, it transforms into this officer only prison camp. Way different. For example, we have a Confederate officer, he has a toothache. It becomes an abscess. He takes the Island Queen and goes across the bay and goes to see his dentist. And he gets it fixed under the military policy in so doing. So we kind of have these relaxed policies towards these POWs, not typical at other prison camps. So because it's the Southern Gentry and we have some named officer only, I like to say it's like this prison camp was full of the quote-unquote rock stars. Okay, the Confederacy. We talked about Isaac Trimble, Archer, Jeff Thompson, Henry K. Douglas. Anybody have any background with Johnson's Island at all? What they kept, the POWs kept there? You can see this at the Sandusky Historical Society. Bush has them at his place in Heidelberg. He actually kept autograph books And they would sign them, almost like it was, they were going to college. And then everybody would have these signatures making them out to one another. So we kind of have this elite feel at Johnson's Island. One of my favorite stories as we're going is they played baseball much like at other sport prisons. So baseball was played. There's actually a theory, I give my students this book by George Kirsch, and in it he argues that the spread of baseball started down south because of Civil War prison camps. So these Yankees are captured, brought down south, all of a sudden they're playing baseball at places like Salisbury Prison. Okay? Well, here they did play baseball at Johnson's Island. They had a huge recorded snowball fight that the officers wrote about. And it was a neat event because as these various officers are writing about their bloody noses, twisted ankles in this huge snowball fight, and the opposing sides actually captured one another. And then they had an exchange system worked out to exchange the captured prisoners. And this is all within a prison camp community. The other piece of this is when some officer prisoners are captured down south, they are allowed to bring their body servants with them. Can somebody tell me what a body servant is?
A slave.
A slave. So we have slavery in post-emancipation Ohio. Who provides for them? As long as the officer prisoners provide for them, they can bring their slaves to prison camp. So that's Chris Barr details that in one of the chapters in Crossing. Any questions so far? Any questions? You're ready to ask questions.
Was there anything else on this island?
No, not really. Not really. It was just a prison camp, and that's why William Hoffman could lease the entire island out, and he was happy that he could do that. He couldn't do that at all the other places. He was looking at acres, so he wanted something near Sandusky and somewhere he could lease the entire island.
Mike, most people don't know how cold it can get up in Johnson's Island.
Yes.
Do you have escapes into Canada from there?
Escapes where?
Escapes into Canada, like your Canadian province?
Yeah, so there are escapes, especially when the lake froze over.
Yeah.
So we do have some escapes, and because of the leniency too. Now we also have to remember this is the gentleman class,
Yeah.
and on honor, so to speak, they're not going to escape. But I'm glad you brought that up, only because as we move forward into this, there's always the notion, the idea that there's going to be a raid from Canada, okay? And it's the Beale conspiracy, or the Lake Erie conspiracy is better term for it, which actually went down and it failed. But the USS Michigan is watching guard over Johnson's Island.
Okay.
Okay? And we'll get into that a little bit more. Yeah.
Is there any perimeter security, wall, fence?
Yeah, so we have a 12-foot high stockade wall. You're on an island. What we ought to remember though too is prisoners can't go outside the gates for wood detail, things of that nature. So they're allowed to. As we move forward, we'll see that Johnson's Island is unique because they have so many resources that enlisted men in prison camps don't have. They have families, they have networking. So if they arraign a family member, extra food will be provided for them. Extra clothing, like Wayne was saying, with the cold weather, will be provided for them. The enlisted men in prison camps wouldn't allow for that. Camp Douglas would not allow. Any more? Yeah.
What happened to the body servants or the slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation? Were they still allowed? Did they still bring them in?
They're still there.
Still there?
Yeah.
Did they stay afterwards?
No, they for the most part. Now, I can't trace everyone, but for the most part, they went back with their former masters.
Well, I guess they're there.
Yeah. So, some visual for Johnson's Island. That is the Island Queen. The Island Queen went back and forth, bringing supplies to Johnson's Island prison, bringing the new rebel captives to Johnson's Island. I want to read you, just briefly, bear with me a little bit, from the book and from the primary sources. I always like introducing primary sources to get a feel. We can take our time machine and go back to April 10th, 1862. The Sandusky Register reports that 200 rebel officers would be arriving soon, and it warned, quote, fishermen, yachtsmen, and others need now be careful not to land on Johnson's Island, since the rebel prisoners are coming. The paper also wondered if prisoners could toe the mark for their daily roll call, if they have toes like other men at all. So now there's some interest going on, some curiosities going on. A couple weeks later, the Sandusky Register noted the southern gentry are becoming quite the rage now. The knowing ones have long predicted that our bay and lake islands would one day become a favorite resort for pleasure seekers of our sister states to the south. Some thought that Uncle Sam had made a great mistake in erecting such commodious accommodations on Johnson's Island. The thing is likely to be well patronized. Those who came yesterday had baggage which indicated they were to stay for the entire season, and we were informed that the party which preceded them had some 9 tons of luggage. Not typical of other prisoners. Not typical of other prisoners. Another shot of Johnson's Island. I still have interest in this over here. I can go back and make that question. So captivating captives, newspaper reports. So bear with me. June 5th, 1862, the Cleveland Leader. So this is the Cleveland newspaper. An article read, there will be an excursion to Johnson's Island for the benefit of the West Side Bethel Church. Now, by the way, Cleveland's about 60 miles away. Okay. There will be an excursion party to Johnson's Island for the benefit of the West Side Bethel Church. On board of the May Queen. The Sandusky Register that reported just let the Clevelanders come right along, and they could see the rebel quarters, if not the rebels themselves. In the meantime, the May Queen was charging $1 for gentlemen, 50 cents for ladies. By the end of summer 1862, excursionists crowded the decks, singing along with higher bands to various patriotic renditions, including the Star-Spangled Banner, John Brown's Body, and Yankee Doodle. Settlers on the Michigan, that Wayne and I just talked about, settlers on the Michigan, you'd think they would prohibit this happening. These excursion parties, these ships going anchoring off at Johnson's Island to get a view of the quote-unquote officer prisoners. Settlers on the Michigan saluted the excursionists and joined in the patriotic melodies and orchestrations. Captains had to be very careful not to ram into one another in the congested waters. The Sandusky Register wrote, fleet of vessels. At one time Saturday afternoon, some 11 vessels were visible from the bay in the back of our office. Of these, 4 were laying at anchor off of Johnson's Island, 3 more well over onto the way to the shore, and 1 down towards the cove. 2 others were coming over from the northern channel and beating down the bay. By war's end, excursion parties came as from close as Fremont, Ohio, 20 miles away, and from Buffalo, New York, 250 miles away. All right, I have a little piece of this. There we go. So imagine this, these excursion parties, let me break away from the notes a little bit. Why do you kill? Why do you kill? Why are people willing to pay $1? And this is like, nowadays, tailgating before the game and going to the game. But why the appeal? Talking 11 vessels, the captains provide meals and drinks for the excursionists, for the onlookers. We have bands playing patriotic songs, Yankee Doodle Dandy, John Brown's Body. Yes?
Well, I mean, they're just touting the fact that they were victorious over these guys who were the cream of their enemies. Right?
Yes. So they were kind of thumbing their nose at these prisoners. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Class. Yes?
Well, I mean, whether some of the Southerners are somewhat of a novelty, we're very far removed from the actual battle scenes or reading about it, but this is real physical evidence to see the enemy.
Absolutely. I like how you said it better than me. A novelty. This is a new thing. Do they have toes? Okay. Things of that nature. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to say that, early in the war, when the Union was suffering a lot of reverses, the Confederates were portrayed as sort of Superman. And here's these are real folks. We captured them. We beat them.
We captured the gentry of the best, so to speak. The other piece is what I found in doing this research, and the purpose of this and my chapter. And by the way, and edited. My dad teases me, he goes, oh, you only edited this book, right? And I contributed to it, but oh my goodness, editing a book, I'd rather just write a book rather than edit a book. Okay, so I did it, I'm done, I'm good to go. All right. But anyway, as we're moving forward, I found a pattern that developed up north. Okay, and it's especially a northern phenomenon in these viewing episodes. All right, but there's also this idea of being a part of the war, and I found this in the newspaper articles and also the primary sources from the prisoners themselves. So they wanted to make this demonstrative acts, so to speak. Okay, these excursionists or onlookers, maybe they couldn't participate in the war themselves, whether because of gender, because of race, or various other maybe disability, but now they could by kind of making fun of the POWs. So we said singing songs. I'm not going to go where I'm going with the Camp Douglas stuff yet, but we have various practices that these excursions had taken place in 1862, 1863. Now, interestingly enough, I just wanted to include this because I didn't want you to have a sense of captivity at Johnson's Island. At Johnson's Island, the death rates were less than 2%. Very, very low. 240 roughly. You can go to Johnson's Island and you see the headstones there at the cemetery of 15,000. Right? Very low. These two other prison camps that we're going to talk about next, not the case. We're going to circle back around to Johnson's Island. Do you have any questions?
Did the onlookers ever disembark and
They're not allowed on the island.
they're not allowed?
Yes.
Was the sanitation there particularly good as a contributing factor to that low death rate?
Yes, the sanitation was good, and I would say because of the gentry in the officer class.
Did their treatment change as the war created more problems for the North and more death and everything? Were they treated more poorly toward the end of the war?
Good question, because there in '64 there's a ration reduction, but because of the networking that the officer prison had, they could supplement rations from family members back home, and it was permitted. Really good question, because not the case at the enlistment network, you know, the so-called grunt. Okay, when we see Camp Douglas and Elmira, not the case there.
And was this the only prison camp for officers, or were there others?
So you have a smattering of other prison camps, especially the 4 prison camps. We talked earlier much about Fort Delaware, Fort Warren, McHenry, so you have some officers there. But Johnson's Island was the main officer one. Just like down south in Richmond, we have Libby Prison, and that's the only officer prison for Union captives. Okay. Yes?
I guess my question would be then, do you know what the average length of captivity was at this camp, and what was the exchange rate there for these officers?
It depended. It really depended. So I can't give you the exact numbers. So it depended on who was being exchanged and why they're being exchanged for. And we'll talk a little bit more about the exchanges as we go on. But these are high-profile POWs there. So if they had connections, so to speak, they probably could get exchanged. You know, we were talking before about Isaac Trimble and these other people. The other piece to it is some are injured on the battlefield, right? So they have to be especially taken care of. And the officer class was. So the Union did a good job with the upper class prisoner of war. All right, so, yeah.
Were those bunkhouses 2-story, and how were they heated?
So there's typically 2 stoves in each barrack. And I have some friends from Elmira down here, from the friends of Elmira Prison, and we have a reconstructed barrack there. But it's, I believe, 1 story, and then you have stoves at the end of each barrack. Better to have a barrack than not, right? Because that wasn't provided all the time. That's the prison camps. Point Lookout in Maryland, 10 something. That's the largest of all northern prison camps. And I promise I will field more questions as we move forward, but I do want to get to Camp Douglas. So now we're moving to Illinois. This is a big one. 80 acres. 80 acres. Now, like Elmira Prison, Camp Douglas was a training base, a rendezvous point before it was converted into a prison camp. So It has a long history of 3 years. Sometimes it served the same role as a training base, or at least a rendezvous point, okay, and also as a prison. 18,000 passed through its gates. More than 6,200 passed or died. And doing research on this, I'm getting so old now. I remember when I was an undergrad student, the death set from the Civil War was 600,000. And then it moved to about 620, then 650. Some will argue 900,000. Camp Douglas originally was 4,200. More research has shown that there's 6,200. Now, at Camp Douglas, I don't know if you're aware, but it has the largest mass grave in the Western Hemisphere, in Chicago, in the Brownsville area of Chicago, the city's south side. My son's out there now, and I plan on going with him and taking a look at it. But I've been to Camp Douglas. Dave Keller and other people from the Friends of Camp, the Restoration Friends of Camp Douglas are doing good work there, as well as other places like Elmira and Johnson's Island. All right, so let's move forward with this. We have a gentleman by the name of George Excel. He's from England. He's able to leave England and he ends up in New York City, becomes a carpenter, so he takes on a trade and he's a carpenter. He wasn't doing well in New York, so he decides to move to the West. Always opportunity out West, right? So he moves to Chicago. He lives in Cottage Grove, right across the street of the newly formed Camp Douglas, and he has an idea. He pitches to the Union authorities there, if I can build a structure, I will help you view the prisoners. I will take surveillance of the prisoners. If there's any attempted escapes, I will tell you. And George Excel ends up building a platform. Let me read you this. He petitions because of his loyal qualities, and this is from a newspaper, and with the understanding that we report any suspicious activities to the Union, he is able to build the structure, and at Cottage Grove it goes, a Yankee at Cottage Grove, this is from the Chicago Tribune, a Yankee at Cottage Grove appreciates the weakness of our citizens. He has built a tower. At the top of the tower, he gives a complete inside view of the prison camp. The owner proposes to admit all who are willing to pay the necessary fee, 10 cents by the way. There's a nice little fortune in the enterprise. The publicity paid off for itself, as it starts making an estimated $125 per day. At his marketplace, he also built a restaurant and tavern underneath his observation. So it's very interesting. He didn't have the land in order to build it right across from the prison gates at Camp Douglas. Okay? But I have a couple different pictures for you. So I get it close to it. Here's your tower right here. Here's Excel's tower. It's called the Union Observatory. He paints it red, white, and blue. He charges 10 cents. He provides spy glasses, or opera glasses, for viewing. Underneath, he has his tavern and restaurant. That was his only issue, is that he's leasing the ground. He's leasing the ground from a gentleman by the name of George Loomis. So he has to pay Loomis in rent, so to speak, but he uses horizontal integration at its best. Let me give you another better shot of this. Now, when I was doing my research on it was my dissertation at the time, I was aware of this from Elmira. I wasn't so aware of it at Camp Douglas, and I started, while I was doing research, I started connecting dots. Okay, so here's your tower right there. You kind of see a person up there.
Question.
Yeah.
So for your 10 cents, how long did you get to stay out there?
Great question. I was actually perfect transition to this anyway. So because the Union Observatory got so much viewership, so crowded, he had to designate roughly anywhere from a half hour to an hour per viewing episode. because it was so crowded. The primary sources speak to that. The newspapers saying, you have one shift, they come down, next shift, they come down, next shift. An omnibus line was running to downtown Chicago, bringing visitors from downtown to Cottage Grove. All right, so there's this carnival type of atmosphere that takes place here. So let me read this one. So Cottage Grove, Sunday afternoons, and the Union Observatory. By the way, just like I said, a self-painted observatory, red, white, and blue. And here we go. Here's your primary source of newspaper. The rebel horde that was confined in Camp Douglas was a source of mixed sensations to the people of the city. People would spend Sundays taking horse and cars out to camp. There was an observation tower where it could cost a dime to climb and stand on the platform overlooking the pen as if peering at animals in a zoo. If one wasn't enough, we have another. And then the competition, Yankee capitalism, is at its best. Another, and this is the history professor, being a geek. I'm at the Chicago History Center, and I'm reading about the Union Observatory, but then I'm seeing something about another observatory, a free observatory, and I can't find it. And it's just some quick reference to it. And then at the Chicago History Center, and the staff did a great job there, they're bringing me maps. They're bringing me maps. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. If you look right here at this building, here's a camera bit. That's another observatory. I'm getting closer. So I'm kind of yelling in the quiet archival department saying, I found it, I found it, I found it, the other observatory. And the staff was not happy with me right away, but I think they were very interested I found this in the map. Yeah?
Did the prisoners play to the crowd?
We're going to get there. Good question. Good question. Let me keep going. The Chicago Tribune reported, Camp Douglas, oh, by the way, let me go back here. So we have the Union Observatory, the Free Observatory here, both doing a Russian business. The Free Observatory is adorned with a huge U.S. flag, American flag. But then we have the crash. Now, I teach my students the Panic of 1837, the Panic of 1857. Dean, have you ever heard of the Panic of 1863?
Not a lot of it. Overshadowed by the war.
What happens with captivity during the Civil War? We have an exchange system, okay? When the exchange system's working, do you think anybody's going to visit the observation decks? Probably not, because there's no prisoners in there. So this is what the Chicago Tribune reported. Camp Douglas has been void of interest. The city railroad cars have run later. The hotels and lager beer saloons have languished, and they've longed for customers. The Union Observatory and the Free Observatory have waited in vain for patrons. Fortunately for Cottage Grove business people, like the observatories as well, the exchange system was collapsing. At the benefit of the entrepreneurs, but not at the benefit of the prisoners, obviously. The Tribune said, should the weather be pleasant, scores will patronize the observatories. Scores will patronize the observatories overlooking the camp. As it is possible to gain admittance, as it is impossible to gain admittance into the camp, we suggest to those who go witness the parade and see the prisoners, and they take with them their spy glasses. So once the exchange system fell apart, again we have thriving observatories to view the prisoners. I do have to mention this as well. So you remember how we talked about George Excel? He is kind of the father of observation decks. So we're going to see Elmira pretty quickly. But he leased that portion of land outside the prison. And with that, after this crash, so to speak, he wasn't making any money. When the exchange falls apart, now we have more prisoners. Somebody was taking business away from him because he had a tavern and he had a restaurant at the Cottage Grove Hotel. Who was that person?
Loomis.
Excel. So he told, basically he went to George Excel and he says, you know what, I want to take the lease back, it's void, it's null and void basically. Okay? And Excel said, are you kidding me? Yeah, I'm signed off for, I think he signed up for 2 years for the lease. And it went all the way to court. And the verdict came back in Excel's favor. George Loomis, the buyer of Cottage Grove Hotel, he lost his senses. And he confronted Excel, him, as well as a Colt revolver. And he threatened to shoot Excel. Excel went running away. He found solace with a Judge Brown, and that was the end of the story. Excel kept his observation tower, but that's how crazy it was getting at Camp Douglas as far as the money being used. Getting a little short on time, so I'm going to move right to Elmira.
Was it named for Stephen A. Douglas?
So Stephen A. Douglas's property, it was right next door to it. So yeah, and he just recently passed his away as well. So it was. Yep. So there's actually 3 observatories because Douglas is not far away. When the buildings had this observation tower, but it was a separate type of thing. It wasn't for the so there's no profit. I'm mostly looking at pay for viewing. So for Elmira, again, for context, just like Camp Douglas, it's a former training base, a rendezvous point, 40 acres. Foster's Pond kind of dominates that. Foster's Pond, has its reputation. It serves as a latrine, but also as sometimes drinking water. Correspondence between the commandant at Elmira, the chief surgeon, Eugene Sanger, they go back and forth. One report says that Foster's Pond is a festering mass of corruption, impregnating the entire atmosphere of its pestilential odors night and day. The surgeon calculated roughly 2,600 gallons of urine, highly loaded with nitrogenous material, is released into Foster's Pond. They get their prisoners first in 1864, July of 1864, and we have very similar circumstances at Elmira as we do with Camp Douglas. Now, we made the point, or Wayne did, about how cold Ohio is. Okay, well, think about how cold Illinois and now New York State is, and now you also don't have the furnishings of proper clothing for family members. Authorities would not let it pass through. If you look closely on this map, top of that, you'll see this. And that is another observatory. And that's along Water Street in Elmira. Let's grab some primary sources on that. The Elmira Daily Advertiser on July 29th noticed a large elevated platform had been erected outside barracks number 3, which commands a view of the enclosure and its inmates. 10 cents admittance is charged to all who wish to ascend the steps and take a view. The Daily Advertiser also commented, the observatory at barracks number 3 commands a splendid view of the rebel camp within the enclosure. We advise all our friends who have not been up there to go at once. It will amply repay itself in the small expense of getting there. On August 10th, the local press wrote, already there is a great bustle and stir. The large number of visitors about the camp resemble the thronged aspects which has marked our state fairs. This article deduced the observatory erected opposite the enclosure with its 2 stories has become an enticing place for seeing the rebels. It is often crowded with sightseers and must prove a paying institution. So a Mr. Nichols was able to build this town, very similar to Camp Douglas. A Binghamton, New York newspaper reporter came and right from the Binghamton Standard wrote, an enterprising Yankee at Elmira has erected a frame near the quarters of the rebel prisoners so that persons can see from it the enclosure occupied by the prisoners. Visitors pay 10 cents. Each has the privilege of ascending the observatory to gaze at the rebels. He also worried about the owner's daily income, revealing hire had taken as high as $40 a day. I think this last one by a Rochester Union reporter, this kind of gets the essence of things. in this article, it reads, the owner intends to keep in his tower a powerful spyglass, the aid of which visitors can see the vermin, which is said to be so plenty on the bodies of the prisoners. So they want to see the vermin of the POWs. Let me give you a quick look at the tower. I lost it. Yeah, it didn't come up. I have a picture of the observation deck. Here's a sign point. It's in the book. But there's pictures of the observatory. For some reason, it's not coming up here. And this is from the observatory. So ultimately, you have a rival tower also built at Elmira. The brothers W and W Mears have a rival structure. It's a deck taller. It's 5 cents cheaper. All along Water Street in Elmira, booths were placed selling hotcakes, gingerbread, lemonade, and some alcohol as well. So definitely a carnival type of atmosphere had been undertaken at Elmira. So I have this patriotism. I'm going to read you the primary source on that. But before I go there, do you have any questions about Elmira before I get into POW reactions to the observation books? Yeah.
Does this facility become something of Broadway's famous reform?
No. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion. I'm sure Doug can tell you, there's so much confusion between Elmira prison, modern stuff, and back during the Civil War. Civil War is a temporary type of thing, just like Civil War prisons in general, the open air stockades. And by the way, these open air stockades like Elmira, Camp Douglas, and Johnson's Island, they lend themselves to doing episodes. Okay, you go to Fort Warren, Fort Delaware, Fort McHenry, you can't view it. You can't get a look in, so to speak. Any more for Elmira? So how do POWs react? How do they react? And you can only imagine how they reacted in their diaries and the primary sources with them. I start backwards since we've come full circle with Elmira. Anthony Kiley, a POW at Elmira, who ultimately becomes mayor of Richmond, he argued, or he contended, there was a partnership that existed between the owner of the observatory and prison personnel. He wrote in his account, the observatory, and by the way, Kiley worked for an officer at Elmira prison, inside the prison, and this is typical. If you could read or write, you would be hired by officers in prison camps, so to speak. Well, he was in the know, and he wrote that the concern paid for itself in 2 weeks. A fellow Virginian wrote that when the weather was pleasant, a great many went on top to look at us. This is by John R. King. On a beautiful late spring day, there was a number of nicely dressed ladies and gentlemen on the top floor. He continues, our provost marshal was sitting on the floor below. Kiley was surprised, going back to Anthony Kiley, surprised that P.T. Barnum has not taken the prisoners off the hands of old Abe, divided them in companies, and carried them in caravans throughout the country, turning an honest penny in the show. Patriotism is spelled with a Y at the end of the first syllable up here. And you can see in this sketch, the observatory in the back. So we were asking how they would respond. Well, some prisoners would congregate and perform for the onlookers, ground tumbling, okay, exercising, things like for history, I guess they could do. They would also make gestures, as you can imagine, at the onlookers. At Camp Douglas, very similar at Camp Douglas. Okay, I'm not sure that. Just look at the, look at the clothes. Look at the clothes, or lack of, at Camp Douglas. So performances, gestures, things of that nature. But at Johnson's Island, more refined men. Again, like the pros. So more refined men. How did they respond? Well, it was above them to do that sort of thing. What they did instead was they had communication with the excursion parties. And when an excursion party came out and they started seeing John Brown's body or the Star Spangled Banner, they run to their barracks and hang out a Confederate flag. Or a black flag. So we have this communication between the two. The black flag symbolized the black people that the North represents. Coming full circle from one of the questions that I posed, was this legal? Codification. The Lieber Code. So we have this gentleman by the name of Francis Lieber, who the Lincoln administration kind of solicited to come up and come with the codes of proper military law, so to speak. In the Lieber Code, General Orders number 100, Section 3, Article 56, states that there should be no, quote, intentional suffering or disgrace of captives. Article 75 adds that prisoners should not be subjected to or intended any indignity. Unfortunately for the captors, they turned a blind eye to the Lieber Code, and they'd rather peer in than not. So, coming full circle, do I have more questions? That is it. Yes?
More in the way of a compliment, Harry Jones is upstairs cheering every time you quoted an original source.
That's good. Whatever I can help, if I can help the institution out, that's good.
Yeah, as these conditions were really bad, so was the gloating the primary reason for this? I mean, it just seemed to me that, when you're looking at this, today, you would say, oh, how terrible, we're treating them so, but at that point, they're the enemy, right? And
They are. There's so many layers to this, I think, in this story. I think a big part of it is that these onlookers that participated in the viewing episodes, they wanted to be a tangible part of the war. They wanted to do their quote-unquote service, and that was like doing their duty for them. That makes sense. Dan?
Michael, just to add to that, this is not that different from what even happened in the 70s and 80s at the Iron Curtain, where the West, and I know from Germany in particular, built several platforms that you could climb in order to look into the East.
This is the first time you're telling me this. Dan and I are friends.
So this is not
Keep going, sorry, yes.
So this kind of, looking at the enemy, making a spectacle of, what's going on the other side, historic tourism. I can tell you later, a colleague of mine wrote a book on exactly that, tourism to the Iron Curtain.
There's our next book. We'll collaborate on it.
did any of this happen at the Japanese internment camps?
I've done from teaching, I've done some superficial stuff on that. I haven't found any on it. But the idea of dark tourism in general, what is dark? It means is it educational? In the article or in the chapter I wrote, I said, well, is it educational? Are there different shades of dark tourism? Is there gray or neutral? Is there a light type of tourism where it's really educational? Can there be a positive experience from the student? And we've all been on tours, so we know it can be very positive and educational. So I think
I was wondering what happened to the prisoners, especially the infantry, after the war was ended, and then secondly, the camps themselves. Did the dark tourism continue, like when I'm trying to think of that prison camp.
Anderson.
No, the one on San Francisco, sorry.
Patriotism.
Yes, that continues to be a tourist attraction.
When war's over, prisoners, if they survive, they're sent back home. They try to recuperate with all the issues that they have to deal with. But they go back home, and the prison camps, for the most part, are dismantled. That's not true for every prison because we have forts that still are in existence, like Fort Warren, Fort Delaware, and those other places. You know, after the war, an interesting side note is Libby Prison is disassembled brick by brick and taken to Chicago for the World's Fair later on in the century. So we still have Civil War dark tourism by people walking through the reconstruction of Libby Prison, now not in Richmond, but in Chicago.
Just to follow quickly is when they were released to go back home, were they, the prisoners, accompanied by others? Because that's a long way to go back home when you're the.
They were given a train, yeah. They're either walking home or taking train back. And the trains are paid for by the federal government, by the way, so they are being sent. And they typically go to rendezvous points and they're released from that rendezvous. Yes.
So this went on at some southern prison camps too?
Great question. This is, the pay for viewing is a northern phenomenon. There is some viewing, we got through this without mentioning Anderson. But at Andersonville, they show local ladies, 2 women in Victorian age apparel and a young lady viewing from a century town. But as far as I know, they're not paying for this video. So it's Yankee capitalism at its best.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can you be more specific about the prisoner gestures? Did they thumb their nose, scratch their finger, moon?
So I don't have any finger. I don't doubt, because I'm pretty sure the finger was still in existence. There's a whole Archer story with that, to tell the students. But I don't have anybody saying that. They probably wouldn't write about that. But they would just say obscene gestures. So we kind of have to put this together. Ground tumbling, things of that nature, obscene gestures. How am I doing on time?
No, you're okay. I was going to say our next speech, profanity, and the
Yeah, so they wouldn't really tell you verbatim for that. Yes?
Question on modern view. Today, most of these prisoner war camps have been washed away, or really, you can't tell it. What are some prison camps that you would recommend that still are pretty good solid conditions?
So, this is kind of a plug. The Friends of Elmira Prison, we have members right over here on the board, right, Barry and Doug. They're reconstructing, they've reconstructed barracks. They actually did a portion of it, they did an observatory, we did the observatory. We're talking about reconstructing the stockade wall. So Elmira, I would say Johnson's Island, you can visit the island as well. You have to pay, I think, 50 cents to go over the causeway to get you there. So there's a gate. Friends and Descendants of Johnson's Island. Obviously, you have to visit anyway. So you can go to these websites. Friends of Elmira Prison, Friends and Descendants of Johnson's Island, and of course Camp Douglas. And David Keller is out there. It's, I believe, called the Restoration Foundation of Camp Douglas Prison. So those 3. I mean, when you go to Camp Douglas and you see Confederate mound, that massacre. When you go to Elmira to live on cemetery and you see 3,000 headstones, okay. Johnson's Island is a different deal because you're talking about 600 or 206 headstones. So it's just a different flavor, so to speak. Nonetheless, like I opened up this, every Civil War prison has its unique history. It's hard to blend them all together. And then each POW has a different experience. Do they have more money? Do they not? Can they work? Can they not work? Are they articulate? Can they read and write? Can they get a job? Are they willing to do work each out? So there's so many factors that come into play. Did I answer your question, kind of? Yes.
I don't want to get political about this, but I think we can bring it up to today. Dark viewing on TV of the cells in Texas of our migrants. You see that every day, if you want.
Yes.
As the war progressed and there were demands on manpower, did they use African Americans to guard any of these prisons?
They did. They did. At Point Lookout especially. And if you get into the primary sources of the Southerners at Point Lookout, they were not happy having African Americans guard them. Mike Music, I think, in the book on, there's a really good artistry from Point Lookout Prison Camp in Maryland. So if you do some research on Point Lookout Prison in Maryland, you had some in Elmira too, but mostly, especially at Point Lookout.
What's the distance between the town of Sandusky and Johnson's Island?
I think off the top of my head it was, I only know it from my car, and that's unfair because I got to drive around. I thought it was 3 miles. I want to say 1.5 miles, not far. Prisoners would travel to try to escape, they'd walk across the ice. One actually fell out.
When I was there, you could take the causeway across.
That's, yeah,
It's
it's
far down.
Yep.
I mean, you don't have to go by boat to
That's
get
right.
there now.
Pay your 50 cents,
Pay
get
your
over
money
into your
to
end.
get across the causeway, I go across there. See, Mike, I want to make sure you get enough time to sign books, make sure you get downstairs. You'll take questions downstairs if anybody has them.
Absolutely.
So why don't you make, I want to make a couple announcements, but I want to get you out ahead of everybody else.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.